Hello there. I'm going to turn these two slabs into this. Hey, what's going on? So, what I have here is two black walnut slabs that I turned into an epoxy river table, and then I inlaid some brass into one of the ends. So, the first thing you want to do is choose your layout. You can see here, I have them laid out. You could make a frame if you want to lay on top out of just some scrap wood to get a better idea of what it's going to look like. So after I get the layout figured out and I get it cut down to size, then I go ahead and flatten it. So I flatten it before I clean it up because any cracks or any voids could get wider and it's going to reveal more stuff when you flatten it because you're taking off some of the top material. It's just easier to clean it up afterwards. So you just saw me putting my flattening bit into my DeWalt router. That DeWalt router is a beast. It's really good for large projects. I've used it a ton and I've never had an issue with it. It does have a plunge base and a fixed base, but it does some work. And that bit is a 1/2 inch shank. I recommend a 1/2 inch shank for some of these larger flattening jobs. It just gives me a little more peace of mind. And I believe that's an inch or an 1.5 inch flattening bit. I'll link it in the description, but it's not extremely expensive and it does a great job. I've used it on a number of slabs. I want to say 4 or 5 slabs at least, and I haven't had any issues with it. So here's my rig, or jig, as I say, for flattening slabs. It's just 2 CNC rails that I got off of Amazon and 2 angle irons that I got from Home Depot screwed together. There's a lot of videos out there. I might make one, but there's tons of videos out there talking about how to make one of these yourself. They're super inexpensive, easy to make, and they'll save you a lot of time and money versus packing your slab up and taking it to a mill or somebody who offers the service. It's about $100 an hour from what I've seen, and I believe it's an hour minimum. So it's about $100 to flatten a smaller slab like this. And I would say you could probably make one of these for under $200. So once you flatten, here's a little better picture of the router sitting in there. So once you have your layout figured out, then you can move on to cleaning up the slabs. This is a different slab, but it's an example of me cleaning up the live edge. So you can see the bark line, and you want to take all the bark off. So you don't want to go too deep to where you're digging into the wood, but you don't want to leave any of that loose bark on there. Just take a chisel and a hammer if need be, and you can get a lot of that off pretty easily. And then you can work your way down, getting the rest of the loose material off as you go. Once you get most of the bark off, you can go back over with a sander. This is just a Makita random orbital sander with a soft pad on it, so you don't flatten out too much of the live edge. And you can just clean up some of that dark bark left on there. If you don't have live edge that's exposed, you don't need to do this. If you're going to epoxy, like the table I'm working on in this video, over the live edge, this isn't necessary. Here's another example of some loose wood in a slab. If you see anything like this, that needs to come out. If you have any gaps that need to be cleaned up, any edges in these cracks, they all need to be cleaned up. Just scrape them out, clean them out, wire brush them out, whatever you can do to maybe open up, there's my pup, open up the slabs a little bit, get all that loose stuff out. So here's the final layout. You can see the live edge there isn't completely cleaned up like that other slab was because you're not going to see it. It's going to be epoxied over. So now we're going to move on to the form. Because this table's only getting epoxy down the middle, I don't need to have a form that completely encompasses the table. I just need it to be secure on each end. And then up underneath the slabs where they meet the form, I put a line of caulk to keep any epoxy from leaking out underneath the slabs. I also put some caulk all along the edge of the slab as well, in case that line underneath wasn't adhered. I didn't want it to leak out. So here I'm putting on the end cap, sealing up each end real good, just to make sure that none of this epoxy leaks out. I've watched so many YouTube videos, and the one thing every single content creator says, like Blacktail, Four Eyes Furniture, John Malecki, all those guys, they always talk about epoxy leakage. Leakage is no bueno, as I'm sure you'll agree. So I screw also from underneath just to add some extra support. This will cinch everything down. It'll get squeezed out with the caulk to make sure that there's no leaks. And then here I am, same thing other end. I put some on top. So if I have any overflow and it leaks down the end, it doesn't go down the end and then out the sides. Basically, here's the point. Put as much as you think you need and then put a little more. I mean, it's cheap and it takes you an extra 5 minutes. And the one thing that isn't cheap is epoxy. So here you see I'm putting it along the edge too, just in case it tries to leak up underneath the slab. It won't. One other thing I'll say is, you see that green tape? You don't need that. I had it, so I used it, but I also used mold release. I do recommend mold release. It just helps, especially if you're doing a large pour. Just use it. Here's the form completed. I put a dam on top, as you can see there. You can use hot glue as well, but I had the caulk out, so I just used it. I just put it along the top of the river portion there, because you want to put enough epoxy in there to where it kind of overflows a little bit, so you're not short. The most important thing I forgot to mention was make sure your workpiece is dead level, or as close to level as you can get it. When you pour the epoxy, if it's not level, it's going to pool on one side before the other side's filled up. So just make sure it's as level as possible. It'll save you a ton of headache. So here's the epoxy. It's super clear, deep pour. They say it can go up to 4 inches. I do this in multiple pours. It's not necessary to do it multiple pours, but when epoxy dries, it heats up. And if you pour it too deep, it can crack. I use activated charcoal as a dye. If you're going to use a liquid tint or a liquid pigment, I recommend sealing the edge of your table and the top of your table so you don't get any bleed from the epoxy or the dye in the epoxy into your table, which will cause staining, especially on that sapwood edge there, that white wood. Sealing the wood also helps with air bubbles, amongst other things. So it's not a bad idea to completely seal your workpiece with epoxy if you're going to do a complicated pour. This was a pretty straightforward, simple pour, and I didn't feel it was really necessary. But if you're going to do an intricate piece where you're pouring, a lot of epoxy into a lot of different crevices, it's a good idea to seal your piece with clear epoxy. Here I'm popping the bubbles, and I poured 2 different buckets at a time, so I just kind of went through and mixed the 2 together. So once it's dry, you can pull it out of the form, and here I am with my flattening jig. It's rather messy. Make sure you're wearing breathing protection, not just a dust mask. I recommend some sort of filtered mask, because this is pretty nasty stuff. I mean, it's epoxy and wood, and it gets everywhere. You can build, and I've seen them before, you can build shrouds, little brushes that fit on each side of your sled that help with this, but definitely wear breathing protection and eye protection. It gets everywhere. Take your time and go slow. I take about a 16th of an inch, maybe a little more off in each pass. Make sure your workpiece is level. If you need to raise your workpiece up so that your router can reach it, find a way to do that while keeping your workpiece level. Either use scrap pieces of wood or an old desktop. Do not extend your router bit out of your router to reach your workpiece, especially the larger ones. You're just asking for a bad day. And make sure your router bit stays secure in your router. After every few passes, turn it off, take a break, flip it over, make sure it's tight so you don't have any mistakes. Because if that router bit comes loose, it's going to burrow right into your workpiece. One other thing I'll say about this router sled, you'll see I have stop blocks kind of set up on each end of the sled itself so you don't run your router into your CNC rail. Here I am, once it's flattened, just squaring off the sides. This is a Festool track saw. It's amazing, of course, but it's also amazingly expensive. Now, I do use the track later in the video for other things as well. So it's rather versatile. There's a lot you can use it for, but it's not necessary. I have a Milwaukee skill saw, circular saw, sorry, and a straight edge I've used on other projects just fine. But I'm just taking a couple passes here. If you do use a track saw, know how to use it. Take your time. Don't cut your face off. So this is one of the best upgrades in my shop that I did. It's one of my favorite tools. It's a Bosch 6-inch sander, which is huge, just so we're all on the same page. And it does material removal. It has a speed setting, as well as obviously just the random orbital mode. It competes, and I've heard can outperform the Festool Rotex. As you can see, all of those flattening marks are gone. I start at 80 grit and I go up to sometimes 320. You don't need to go to 320. 220 is plenty. Make sure you're wiping it down. And if you need to, you can vacuum the table in between grits. It'll pull a lot of that fine sanding out of the pores, especially if you're like 220 to 320. But it's not necessary. You can just go to 220. Even 180 is fine. So now we're at the fun part. So this is where I decided to inlay brass. Because there's so many epoxy tables out there, I wanted to do some metalwork, as simple as this metalwork is, if you could even call it metalwork. They're 1/8 inch by 1/8 inch brass rods, I guess you could say. I got them from Online Metals. I highly recommend it. They don't sponsor me. I didn't get a discount, but the price was great and the shipping was fast. So I highly recommend it. But basically what I'm doing here is I'm just tracing out the layout. Basically, they're just going to be irregular lengths where no two lengths are the same. So you'll see here in a minute a little better shot. It's pretty straightforward stuff. Just, I believe they were 1/4 inch apart from each other. Here you can see it a little better. It's kind of like laying hardwood floor. If you've ever laid any floor before, you don't want them even with each other. You want to offset them. So here's my router setup with the plunge base, and that is a downcut spiral bit. There's also upcut spiral bits. So just like the name says, it cuts down. It pushes all the material down. And what that does, especially if you're not cutting all the way through the piece, is cuts down on tear out. So you're cutting down into the piece as opposed to cutting and pulling the material up, which can cause chip out on the top edge. And when I'm inlaying brass, I don't want a chipped edge flush against the brass, if that makes sense. Just make sure when you're using a downcut bit and you're not going all the way through the piece, you're taking small chunks out at a time. If you take too large of a piece out, it's pushing all that material down into the cut, and it can either break your bit or, I've seen it before, start a fire. So just take your time. Here I am setting up the distance for the next cut. I just place the bit right in the tracing line, and I get that distance. Then I'll take the square down to the other end, as you can see there, and make sure that distance is good. Then I'll bring the router back here in a second and make sure that it's still in the trace line. I'll tighten it down, make any minor adjustments, and you'll see that flat edge of the router base right there. Do not put that against your guideline. I know it seems like it would make sense to do so, but as you can see here, I have the curved edge of the router base against the track. Because if I rotate that at all, it's not going to change the distance of the bit to the track. If that flat edge was against the track and for whatever reason it came off of the track, it would push that bit off center. Trust me. I know it doesn't seem like it makes sense, but it does. And here you see me squaring up the ends with my chisel. Now, I made a mistake. You'll see here I'm making a cut, and then I'm pushing straight down, and then I'll pull straight back. That's how you want to do it. Before that, for some reason, I pushed forward and up, and you'll see what I did. I chipped. I don't know what I was thinking. I chipped a little piece off. Now, I'm probably going to sand deeper than that chip is anyway in the end, but I wanted to fix it. It bugged me. So I'm just using a little CA glue, Star Bond. Fixing it up. I'll put some accelerant on there in a second. Once it kind of holds itself down so it doesn't expand and pop that crack up. There you go. All better. So here, I'm going to start fitting some brass in. Here's a few more pieces. And I put them in, and I give them a little tap with a hammer just to seat them into the end so they sit flush. Then I give them a little mark just past the end. You'll see here's a better view. And then I just use a hacksaw. They're like $70 on Amazon. Little metal cutters. But it's not necessary for this project. Then I just square them off of my bench sander. And there you have it. So that'll bring us to the end of part 1. Part 2, lots more to do. I got to secure the brass to the table. I got to cut it flush with the end of the table. Sand, finish, figure out a leg situation. Hopefully y'all enjoyed this. If you guys have any questions or comments, leave them below. I'll respond to everything. If you enjoyed the video or got anything out of it, like and subscribe. That would be awesome. All the products I used are linked in the description below. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.